The frost gnawed through my coat long before the sun even thought of rising. My breath drifted out, turned to dust, and settled on my lap like ash. I hunched closer to the fire, watching a small pot of water struggle to boil, each bubble hesitant, as if afraid to exist in air this cold. The tea leaves clung stubbornly to the bottom, unwilling to stir, through the thin veil of smoke. My children's laughter floated weakly across the stillness. They were near the sled, rolling snow into a crooked ball, faces flushed and shining. Their joy sounded distant. I rubbed my hands over the fire, waiting for the day to break in this place where even warmth moved slow. Our camp rested deep in a valley bleached the color of bone, hemmed in by mountains that stayed white no matter how hard the sun tried. The peaks looked close enough to reach, but I knew better. They were days away, maybe more. No matter which way you turned, the world was nothing but ice, snow, and a silence so wide it could swallow a man whole. We lived between 3 tents, one for my wife and the children, one for me and our tools, and a smaller one for meat and dried fish. Each morning began the same, checking ropes for frost cracks, swinging the hatchet into frozen meat that splintered like glass. I greased the sled runners with animal fat so they'd glide instead of grind against the ice. By midday, I'd count the firewood, measuring how long before we'd need to make another trek to the forest. The rhythm of work left no space for words, only motion. My wife fed the fire, melting snow into water, her breath curling with the steam. The children circled the tents, laughter cutting sharp through the thin air. When the wind died, the world became too clear. Every scrape of my knife, every twig snapping, every step in the snow echoed loud enough to make life itself sound like a disturbance. As I checked the sled ropes, a flicker of motion caught my eye along the far slope, a thin white ribbon twisting down the mountainside. At first, I thought it was just the wind stirring loose snow, but then it thickened, gathered weight, began to move with intent. An avalanche, small and distant, but enough to tighten something deep in my chest. I called for the children, my voice dull and flat in the frozen air. They froze mid-play, turned toward the mountain, then ran back without needing to be told twice. My wife stepped out of the tent, shading her eyes against the glare. I waved her off. It was far, too far to reach us. Yet the air had changed, heavy and close, a pressure building behind the silence. The tent gave a low groan, fabric drawn tight as if the cold itself were tugging on it. I pressed my palm to the canvas, hard as bark. The thermometer on the pole had dropped past anything I'd seen that season. My breath hit the tent wall and spread out like cracks in glass. Something unseen had settled over the valley, quiet but certain, and I didn't yet know its name. I pulled the rope ends from the snow, stiff as wire, and began tightening each knot. My gloves had frozen solid, so I stripped them off, forcing my bare fingers around the frostbitten strands. The cold bit deep, skin sticking where it touched. The tent poles groaned under the strain, wood flexing like tired bones. Inside, my wife sat close to the stove, coaxing snow water into a thin soup. Her hands hovered above the iron lid, not for heat, but just to keep them moving. The cold was still sinking, sharper with every breath. Even our exhalations sounded brittle, like fabric tearing. I worked along the tent's edge, knocking ice from the seams, driving in pegs that refused to hold. The horizon shimmered with a false dawn, light bending over ice, not rising from it. Then came the gust. A sudden, violent slap of wind swept through camp, stinging my face with powder. One corner of the canvas tore free, snapping wild against the pole. I dropped to my knees, pressing the flap down, my fingers clumsy and numb. I found the rope, threaded it through the hole, and pulled tight until all feeling left my hands for a heartbeat. I heard my father's voice, calm, steady, the one he used when fear wanted you to rush. Don't fight it. Move steady. Cold punishes panic. I breathed slow, tied the last knot firm, and stood. The wind eased off, leaving only the soft, uneven crackle of the stove inside. The storm struck without a whisper of warning. One moment, the valley lay still. The next, the wind slammed into us like a wall. It roared down from the mountains. Not a sound but a force, something that rattled the ribs. The tent convulsed, poles bowing, canvas snapping wild in the dark. I lunged for the center pole, felt it splinter beneath my grip. and then the roof collapsed with a crack that swallowed the fire's hiss. The stove toppled, scattering sparks that died before they touched the floor. Smoke clawed through the air, thick and bitter. My wife called my name, her voice lost in the wind, and I heard the children coughing near the flap. I tore through the sagging wall, dragging them out one by one into the open. The cold hit like blades, slicing through every layer. The world vanished into white, no sound. Just the hiss of wind tearing at the edges of everything. The tent was already half buried, canvas whipping like a torn flag. My hands burned red, blistered by heat and cold all at once. The fire was gone. The shelter was gone. For an instant, I wanted to cry out, but the air stole even that from me. I forced my body to move, found the poles by the sled, the small shovel, the frozen blanket stiff as bark. My wife clutched the children tight, scarves wrapped around their faces, eyes wide and wet. Each breath scorched my chest as we worked, wordless, driven by the need to keep going. Together, we dug into the snow beside the wreck, carving a hollow just deep enough to cut the wind. The sky hung low and gray above us, and in that silence I understood how thin the thread was between surviving and becoming part of the ice. We built the shelter piece by piece, layers of snow pressed tight. The sled turned on its side to serve as a roof. I braced it with spare poles, praying they'd hold through the night. My hands no longer obeyed me. Every grasp felt like closing around shards of glass. The children huddled together beneath a stiff blanket, faces buried, their breaths clouding the air in soft bursts. My wife crouched beside the sled, shielding a kettle over a trembling ember, coaxing a flame from almost nothing. At last the fire caught, a thin blue tongue flickering to life among the twigs. I'd kept sealed in a tin, the smell of melting snow mixed with scorched fabric, heavy and close in the hollow space. I fed the flame carefully, watching it breathe, weak but defiant. Each movement cost something. The cold had seeped past flesh, into bone outside. The wind began to lose its edge, dragging itself across the valley with a long, hollow moan. It softened, faded, and was gone. I leaned back against the sled, breath shallow, feeling the weight of silence return. Through a narrow gap, I saw what was left of our tent, a crushed mound, buried under the same snow that now sheltered us. The world had gone still again. There was no triumph in it, only the dull, quiet truth of survival. Morning crept in pale and thin, a faint wash of light spilling across the snow. The wind had died completely, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt sacred. The tent was nothing more than a mound now, frozen stiff, buried under a crust of frost. I stood before it, staring at what had been our home, at the proof of a night that almost took us. My breath hung motionless in the air. It's too still today. I thought again, the same words that had begun it all, but now they held no warning, only a quiet reverence, respect for the cold, for the night that hadn't won, for the truth that nothing in this place came without cost. I fed the fire a few sticks. It hissed, then flared to life, a fragile glow against the white. Behind me, the children were already laughing, carving paths in the snow with their boots, their voices sharp and alive. My wife smiled faintly, hands wrapped around the kettle as if to steady the morning itself. The cold remained, vast, endless, patient, but so did we.